All right, we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for spending your Wednesday evening, well, several for the next like 16, 17 months with me. My name is Sarita Smith. I am the Executive Director of Student Assignment and super excited to have you guys a part of the Southeast Committee. Okay, I'll be forgetting where I'm at. I don't know Georgia too well yet, so I'm still learning. So we're going to go a little bit over the agenda. Today is really about kind of just learning the process. We gave you some data. You're always going to get a data packet. You'll get it the Monday before your meeting. You'll get it a physical one as well. But as we get into the process, there's a Google Drive. You're going to have a lot of stuff in there for you guys to look at. So if you do have a laptop or an iPad or something like that, I would encourage you guys to bring it because you could play around with things as we start putting more of this in. But think of today as a little bit of a test run on the process. There's a lot to learn. This is a large district, which is why we have 4 different committees, so we can kind of chunk some things up a little bit. There are certain times we'll come back as a whole, right, committee as well, just like we did for the first round. So for today's agenda, we'll review quickly the purpose and non-purpose, some of our goals and outcomes. There will be a goal and outcome for every meeting that is specific to that meeting. Every meeting, there's also an exit ticket. So after this meeting, we'll probably give you some information in email. So if there's something that you guys were missing or really wanted me to find out, I think of me as your kind of conduit between you guys and the district, right? And I'll go back and I'll try to find it. Then I'll send it to you and or put it in your Google Drive as I find out more information. Today, though, we're going to kind of go over some of that information from the first exit ticket that I received. We'll review a little bit about how we're going to process data, because again, large district, which means a lot of data. So we'll review that a little bit, understand what big questions are, because once we start getting into the meat and potatoes of this, there will always be a big question we're trying to answer, and that just helps ground the work and the conversation. You guys will kind of start looking at data and using a data worksheet. There will always be a worksheet to capture the information. So we will go around and make sure that somebody at the table has technology, or my esteemed colleagues behind me will help you guys with that, to just make sure we capture your information and just your thoughts as you go through the process. We'll share out, and then we're not going to talk about Trago Edge yet because that'll come much later. Make sure you guys understand what's next. And again, we'll always end with the exit ticket. I have some great colleagues here with me. At every meeting, some of our district staff will also be here as content facilitators. So they will come around once we're in our working groups and just to try to answer whatever questions you guys may have, and to maybe probe you a little bit on your thoughts and your thought process as we go through our process. Okay, so wave your hands, team, yay. All the folks here to help us out. Every packet will also have kind of a working agenda to help us stay on time. I'm a little bit behind, but don't worry, I'll catch up. So Miss Kayla here is my executive assistant. She is kind of behind the scenes. She's the one that emails all the things, that manages our Google Drive, makes sure things are up on the website. So she is the best, and she'll also help keep me on task. So if I'm running too far behind, if she starts waving or something, that's why. So you'll always have this in each of your packets. We'll come back to it because during the bulk of the time, you guys will be in working groups doing some work. All right, so the norm that I want you guys to really focus on, you'll have table tents for each of your meetings, just to, again, bring us back as conversations get a little heated. We want to bring ourselves back to our norms. But today, I want you to think of collective impact. And I said this at our first meeting, this really is not about you, your child, or your program. This is about the whole, right? And then for us, the subset of Southeast. So what would that look like for everybody or every school or every program in Southeast, right? So think of collective impact. There are, and I'll talk about a little bit of this in the exit ticket. If you hear one of us come by and say, that's a non-purpose of this committee, that's what we mean. Like we are not fixing all of DeKalb's problems, right? There is really specific purposes, and some are not our purpose, right? And so if I have some of that redirection language, you'll hear me say things like, that's a non-purpose of our committee. So our outcome is to try to comprehend your team's assigned data set and its relevance to the overarching question. So you have some questions on an orange sheet that kind of looks like this at your table. That's just going to help guide, again, the conversation. The big question is also in your packet. But as you do discussion, I need somebody to be like me to say, and how does that meet the guiding question? How is that implemented, or how is that implicated in the guiding question, right? Pull us back, because, we like to talk, and that's wonderful. But the purpose is really to ground ourselves in the work, yes? All right. So the first exit ticket, just some takeaways. There was a lot of appreciation for like some real conversations, shared experiences from committee members, and just the content in general. And so we appreciate that. We are going to try to be as authentic in this process as possible. I do not have all the answers. I probably don't have many answers. Again, facilitator of the information. We're really trying to push on community impact, and that in a very real way. What you guys say, feel, and believe is what we are going to eventually take to that board. Now, I'm going to push you to triangulate it, connect it to some data, right? Because feelings are great, but how do we connect it to some data, and how do we connect it to some real implications for the district, right? And so we really want to make sure that we keep that kind of same energy. There was a question about just history of specific schools and areas and being helpful, like as it relates to the subcommittees. That's coming. I spend a lot of time every week with our planning team to create the packets, to look at their data, to ask the questions that you guys ask me, and I push it back on them. And so as we get into a little more of the like learning of programs, buildings, and boundaries, it will be very specific to our areas. So you will get that information. There was a few comments about like, I want to know exactly what I should do when I leave here. So this isn't school. There isn't like a specific, like when you leave today, you're going to learn A plus B equals C. That's not this, right? We really, and this is going to be weird and uncomfortable, because when I say we're following the learning, it truly is that. I do not have a design goal at the end of this. Outside of like, there are some considerations we should look at. There are some implications that we know about. And anything between that is really what we come up with, right? Someone mentioned something about year-round school the other day, and I was like, I've never considered that. That's an interesting thought, right? And so when I say things are on the table, they are truly on the table. Dr. Horton didn't say, and Sarita, by the end of this, you better, that wasn't a conversation, right? Like we are truly following the learning. The only thing you'll get is like, here's an outcome, which is gonna be a lot of the learning processing stuff, right? So that may be a little uncomfortable because we don't really have an end goal necessarily in mind. There was some pushing on the accuracy of dates on the history walk. One specifically was the middle school. So I went back to our planning team and I said, they said this ain't right. What y'all think? And so there is actually now on the website, anytime I find something that is relevant to us, I'll put it on our website. Middle school actually started a lot earlier than 1990s. However, the traditional 6th through 8th grade middle school, the bulk of those happened in the 90s. Now, there was a lot of K through 6, K through 7, just a 6-7, a 7-8. Like we did a whole lot over the span of like 20, 30 years. But then once the law got passed around middle school, 6th through 8th grade really became established throughout our district in the 90s. So that's kind of what that point of reference was. But I have a whole middle school like timeline that I posted online for those of you really interested in all the fun things of middle school in the CAP. And so when I say follow the learning, that's the kind of stuff I mean. You guys question it, I'll go back and find it, and then I'll make sure we post it for reference for us to use at a later date. And then there was push on some groups missing, like our Latino or multicultural families as they came into the district, students with IEPs. Here's one of those non-purposes. Students with IEPs, how they are educated, where they live, not a purpose of this committee. Now, programming, there's specific programming in buildings for students with IEPs. We may be looking at something like that. But that team is actually someone in this room, manages that team. That's not us. But fair statement about multicultural students, our Latino families pushing in. The whole industry of Buford Highway, right? Some of that stuff was definitely not on there, and that's just my bad. It was really kind of hinging on Brown versus Board, which is really, really about how Black families were being moved and shifted throughout districts. But we'll be kind of talking about that stuff as we go along in the process. So a lot of this feedback from now on will be given to you guys in email for your specific area as you guys give us feedback. All right, so how we're gonna review data. Again, DeKalb is large. There's a lot of data, even just for the subgroups, there's a lot of data. So we'll be doing something called cluster analysis, which really just means I'm gonna take a huge data set and I'm gonna say team 1, y'all gonna look at 1 through 10, team 2, y'all gonna look at 11 through 20, so forth and so on, right? Just so we all have enough time to dive a little deeper. Otherwise, everybody's just gonna stay at the surface and we're really not gonna ever get to a really solid ground on that. You'll always, again, there's always going to be some kind of documentation of that data, what you think, what you feel, what you're seeing, how you're connecting the dots. And then there will be a share out. So Kayla has been so gracious to make all of us Google Drives for every committee and every team. So we'll be inviting you guys to those drives if you haven't seen it already. I think she sent the link out just again to capture that information, because if you're like me, when you leave here, I'm not going to remember anything we talked about, because that's just my mom brain. It's just not, it doesn't work like that anymore. And so each of you guys have a big question. I'm not going to look at all of them, but there's a big question on your table. There is one group, team 4, that has a slightly different question. Everybody else is looking at the same one. And team 4 will come and talk to you guys a little bit about that one, because we are, Dr. Horton wants us to look a little bit at buildings, but really that is a planning process. But there is something to say about like our stadiums. If you don't know, we have 5 of those wonderful Coliseum 1901 built looking stadiums in our district, but they have turf. And so thinking a little bit about the equity of that, and there's a lot of our high schools that don't get to play at their high schools because we have to use the stadiums. But if the high school can possibly do it, why not? Like we're just pushing on some questions around that. Everybody else is looking at a huge question. Again, do not expect you guys to leave here with an answer to this. This is just for processing about how do we really right size our district. So we have a lot less students than we actually have seats, right? That is both financially a challenge and operationally a challenge. Schools take money to run with kids in them or without them, right? And so if the school is $20 million to run and we got 6 kids in it, and this one we got 100, your student to school ratio, or the ratio of cost to run that building is a lot more expensive for the school that has 6 kids than the one that has 100. That's a financial issue, right? And so looking at things like that, especially based on projected population, because people like Kayla aren't having a lot of kids, therefore our population in the world is decreasing. It's just her fault. So I just wanted to point that out. So each of your teams are assigned, there we go, a data set. So buildings and capacity and enrollment, I forgot the C stood for. Capacity and enrollment, teams 1 and 5 will be looking at that, and each group, each kind of grouping of data is divided by these big orange circles. So if you see an orange circle, that's the beginning of a data set. If you see another one, that's the end. And then it goes to another one. Team 2 is going to look at program schools. A little caveat, these are not all the programs in the building. These are a few high flyers that have separate buildings and programs. So I'll say that again. It's not every program. DeKalb has a lot of types of programs. These are buildings that have programs in them that are dedicated just to that program, and then some enrollment data around those, and just a few of them, but some of the ones that we've been talking about and looking at for a few years. Team 3, that's forecast. What is happening in the future for DeKalb? And I will say again, caveat, like every district is trending low in enrollment. This is not a Georgia or a DeKalb thing. Older people are living longer and staying in their houses longer, which means those houses are not being turned over to families with young children. Like that process is not the same anymore. Generations, what y'all, Z, Y, is beta, whatever, like non-millennials and younger are not having as many children per capita, so then you got lower enrollment. People during COVID decided that they could swing a private school or maybe homeschool. They stayed, they did not come back. So there's a lot of factors pushing on, and then birth rate data is lower. So there's just a lot of factors pushing on that kind of K-3 right now, and know that projection-wise, those kids will matriculate up. Now you can't just create new children, right? So that like, even though some of this stuff looks bleak now, we can't like do a lot for what's today. It's really about like what's coming, right? And so I'll be pushing us a lot throughout this process. I know it's on fire right now, but in 3 years, will it be? And are we really gonna build a new school for 3 years from now when we know that that data isn't going to be the same, right? So we'll really be pushing on those forecasts and projections. And then again, Team Forum is going to look at a little bit of fields and athletics. Okay? It's work time, and we're going to come around and help and talk. And you guys have worksheets. Kayla's going to bring around your worksheets. We will also make sure someone at your table has something to get into that Google Drive and get you some Wi-Fi. And there are bathrooms to I think the left and the right. So if you ever need to go out and do that. And we are here for an hour, so we got some time. And our team will come around and help guide us. So, as you can see, we could sit here all night and talk about this stuff. It again, is a lot of information. So part of your homework, and the reason we give you the slide decks is because you can probably have to look at stuff between meetings. We got a month between meetings. So you're gonna have to look at some stuff and jot down some notes in those Google Drives and have some things to consider and think about, and talk to your neighbors and your friends about what we're talking about so we could really get some valuable input. So we're gonna share out, I just wanted to point out there is a related data and reference slide. There is a lot of information on our planning website. I was showing a few groups. There is a document. I don't know if this thing has does it have a pointer too? Maybe? On the side, is it on the side? No idea. But this number 6, those documents show you where kids are assigned based on where they live and then where they're actually going. And so when people are like, hey, how many kids from Southwest DeKalb go to Arabia Mountain? There's a chart for that. Or to 17 other different schools in the district, right? And so kids in our district can go to other schools for various reasons. One's programming, school choice. The other one is we have these things called House Bill and Senate bills where Georgia state says if you live somewhere, you can go to any school in Georgia, right? Now, we have a formula for that and a calculator now that I'm here, because if the school is at 150% capacity, they don't have any House Bill and Senate bill seats because they are already at capacity, right? And so those are some really cool charts. There is some forecast document. I'll try to give references to some of the stuff in your packets, because if you're a little bit of a nerd like me, you might want to download some things and do some Excel. And the next meeting, you guys will actually have, Kayla is spending a lot of time putting every chart that's going to be in the packet in an Excel document for y'all. So yay, Kayla. So there's just lots of information in there. There is this thing called the Comprehensive Master Plan that happened. It is that's why somebody's laughing. It is a little controversial. A consultant came in and did an assessment of all of our buildings, our programs, our boundaries. Sound a little familiar? And there's just been some questioning about how accurate the information is, who they talk to. There was some stuff happening at the board level when this was going on. There was some change in leadership. So the fidelity of it has been in question. However, there is a lot of information in there that can still be useful, so I don't want us to completely kind of toss it to the side. There is a field assessment in there, which is why I put it in our athletics group's packet, where you can go to every school and they kind of rated outdoor space and indoor space and where it was. Now, our planning team informed me that a lot of the current construction that's happening and the East Block money that was spent in East Block 5 and 6 was because of the master facility. So Dresden is getting a new school. It is getting rebuilt as we speak. Sequoia Middle and High School is coming online. So where Sequoia Middle School and Old Carrie Reynolds currently is, that is all getting revamped, and Sequoia is going to have a high school and middle school in that where that land is. That land is huge. And Cross Keys is getting rebuilt. So a lot of this stuff that came from that plan is coming online. From what happened there. So not all is lost, but there is some things that we'll probably be using it for and pulling from. So these are hyperlinks, enrollment by grade, by school. That document will show you 5 years of actuals and 5 years of projections for every current boundary, for every school. It's a cute little chart, helps out a lot. So again, as we start getting into and what should we do with all this information? These things will come in handy, and all of our slide decks are also on our website. So if you are like me again with paper and you can't hold on to stuff, everything will be on our website and in your folders on the Google Drive. All right, we're just gonna share out 1 or 2 things that you guys, some discoveries, some thoughts from your area. So who wants to go first? What team is gonna share first?
All right, this is a microphone. If you hold it as close to you as possible for our broadcasting.
Great, team 3. Appreciate your volunteering.
Team 5.
Oh, I was just calling on somebody. All right, 5. Team 5, and then 3 on deck.
Okay. So just a couple of discoveries that came out of our work group. We noticed that enrollment in our cluster.
What did you guys look at? Sorry, what data set?
Enrollment and capacity.
Okay.
types of buildings, capacity, and enrollment.
Awesome.
And of course, we're all in the Southeast cluster. And so we noticed for our cluster, enrollment is declining, and most of the schools are under capacity except for the Lithonia cluster. And so we thought that there may be a need to consolidate some of our schools so that we don't have schools that are at 50% capacity. That's very expensive. Plus, we already have a teacher shortage. So how can we get the most out of our resources? We know that folks are not excited about losing their neighborhood school.
Absolutely.
And so we thought about some the types of programs or the types of schools that would motivate or excite parents to not be so torn up about their neighborhood school being closed, but be excited about a new school opportunity. And so some of those programs might be aligned towards STEAM, including AI, cybersecurity, computer science, college and career readiness, any type of theme or magnet programs, art programs, including radio, television, and film, and then also schools that have like project-based learning, real-world exposure, authentic experiences.
All right, well, that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for coming. No.
Because we're in the
Very, very nice. Overachievers over there. All right, group 3, team 3. Thank you. Wait, you got to have a mic
Yes, ma'am.
for the recording purposes.
And then we're going to ask if you can stand as well.
And what data set did you guys look at, team
Okay,
3?
we're team 3. We talked about forecasting.
Okay.
We pretty much determined that a lot of our issues just come from the low population growth in DeKalb County. And that's not just, our particular cluster, it's all over. So because of that, there's a lot of population shifts as well. We also talked about a lot of the older communities where we have grandparents that are, like you spoke earlier, retaining their homes, but then the kids are not returning to these neighborhoods. They're moving places like Rockdale, Gwinnett, and so their children are going those places. So those older communities are now having low enrollment and those types of concerns because there is no real population growth and there doesn't seem to be any growth coming. Right. There's going to be a decrease. So some of the things we discussed, hold on, let me go over to it. Give me 1 second.
No worries.
Okay, so some of the things we touched on were just like, we looked at theme schools and charter schools. We didn't see a lot of that information as far as enrollment and maybe where some about, like we noticed like the middle school numbers were the lowest of all the numbers out of the elementary and the high school. So we were trying to figure out like where did those students go after elementary. So we also realized though a lot of the theme school numbers and charter school enrollment numbers were not included. So we're kind of on the fence of whether those students then went to those programs or did they go private or homeschool or things like that. We also talked about.
Can I interject 1 second? You guys, next week, someone asked us at the other, maybe the North meeting, if we could get data from, what's it called, DG?
Georgia Department of Education.
What's the? Godot. Thank you. It just doesn't flow for me. But Godot, if we could get the information for private and homeschool kids. And I was like, well, let me see. So I was like, man, I have an open records request for it. They was like, here, girl. Like, it wasn't that serious. I was like, okay. Right. So I have the information for us to look at because I do think that we have to consider there are kids that live in our district that don't go to our schools. If they all came back one day, we just got to consider it. Right. Now, I ain't seen no evidence that that's going to happen. However, we do have the numbers of that, and then you will get 5 years of charter as well next week.
But we also didn't see schools like Champion Middle.
Not because they're not boundaried schools.
Right.
That's the only reason you didn't see it today.
We thought that those numbers for schools like that would affect our low enrollment numbers because a lot of the students in our cluster would go to a Champion for middle school. So that was one of the things that we considered.
Yep.
The other thing we talked about were enrollment trends, how we felt like really no new buildings are needed necessarily if we could combine resources, do renovations on the existing schools because a lot of these schools are extremely old You know, there are some new schools, but a lot of these schools are really old.
Yeah.
So we looked at where schools were at capacity, over capacity, and under capacity, and even looking at some of these schools were only designed to fit like 360 students. So like, who would build a school for that small of a community? So for our, you know, we thought that why aren't those things being addressed? You have two
Yeah.
schools sitting in the same technically community, one with a capacity for 360 and one for 370. Why aren't those being combined?
Yeah.
And then the other thing we looked at for why some of the forecasting was some of the equity issues. We talked about how a lot of these people may not be sending their kids to these middle schools because one middle school offers one thing, one middle school offers another thing, and then when you try to transfer your child, it's like going to a different state. So why isn't
Where's the
everything like a
consistency? Yeah.
comprehensive flow? Why is it so different from school to school, which
School.
is another reason why people
May
may be
choose
pulling
something
kids
else.
out, which would affect forecasting.
Yes.
And then the other thing we looked at is how feeder schools are working. So when you look at a school like, she was in, for example, some of the elementary schools from like Princeton, I think it was Princeton Ridge and Redan, like you have one set of students going to
Going
Stevenson,
somewhere and-
you got another set
yeah.
of students going to Lithonia from like the same, you know,
So there are split
districts and
feeders
clusters.
in certain
So how is
clusters,
that
yes,
working
for
for
middle.
the enrollment and for the forecasting for those enrollments?
Absolutely.
So those are some of the things we touched on. Anybody else?
All right, forecast.
But yeah, those are the things we talked about.
Yes, yes. All right, team one, team one. All right, team one, who's coming? Kayla got it. She said, I ain't doing both now. Y'all got one of her skill sets. All right, what data set, team one?
Okay, so for team one, we had,
So you're asking a lot now.
okay. So our data focus was on buildings capacity and enrollment.
Okay.
And our big question that we're trying to answer is how do we determine the right sizing for our district to adequately serve the current and projected student population? And so some of the data sources we looked at was enrollment data, capacity trends, charter schools. For that question number one about buildings, we actually agreed with this group that there wasn't a need for more buildings because there were multiple buildings that were underutilized. And it really wasn't a building issue per se as it was an issue of how we're utilizing the buildings. And so we didn't really want more buildings, but what we did want was a better way for those buildings to be utilized based on the way that specialty schools programs and administrative spaces are utilized in the district right now. And we don't have currently any of them in our southeast area. And so we were looking to use our buildings, one, to have a specialty school in every area that's in the southeast area included, and across the grade bands. So if you just put one specialty school that's in an elementary, then there's nowhere for those
no
students
articulation,
that are in that
yeah.
specialty school.
Yep.
When they go to middle school, there's no comparable
Yep.
specialty school for them to go to if there's only one. And so if you have one for middle, one for elementary, you've got to have a high school
High
that's
school
also
too. Yeah.
a specialty school. So we wanted specialty schools programs and opportunities that would make it equitable for our students to also be able to travel to them, because right now students on the southeast side have to go to the north or central DeKalb to get to a specialty school, which again, the travel is inequitable for us.
Yep.
So everybody else can go around the corner and we're going an hour away, to
Yep.
get to that specialty school. We also talked a little bit about utilizing our spaces for other things. Like we could have more safe centers in the schools. We could use, right now, we have just a few, I think, in the district, but there's not very many of them. We could also use the space to have like career-related programs. We could have trade programs that take up some of that empty space because, again, these buildings are underutilized and we have low enrollments in them, which means there's empty space in the building. We're even talking about maybe considering having theme schools on every area, every grade band as well, because also we don't have these specialty schools. And then We also talked about having up-to-date technology in these schools, and having technology programs available for our students in Southeast. The last question that we had was, what should we consider about the age of the buildings as it relates to reimagining? Again, this table touched it. Our buildings are old.
Period.
Period, right. Our buildings are just old. But what we looked at was the age of the facility. The data did show that these buildings were built between 1950 and 1975. But have we looked at like construction codes, building codes? Have we considered some of the standards with accessibility? So if the buildings were built in the 1950s, there may not have been
It was not. Yeah.
in the
Yep.
50s, and so that building still may not have accessibility.
Correct.
Because
And you
they didn't
technically get
need-
grandfathered in, but if you touch anything that requires a permit, you have to bring the building up to code.
Yeah, so ADA was a big thing, as well as just stuff like having functional lighting, because just not having a well-lit school
Oh, yeah.
could contribute to students not really,
Performing
being
well.
able to learn. Things also to be considered were, ADA accessible bathrooms, ADA accessible playgrounds, and outdoor spaces that could be utilized and should be utilized for all students. We also looked at having these outdoor spaces be for physical activity and athletics, and how the age of the buildings or even the outdoor space may not be suitable for athletics, just because it hasn't been renovated. It's all, it's falling apart. As well as having safety requirements and codes, and looking at buildings, paint. I mean, like, there's a multitude of safety issues when you look at age of the building. And then we also looked at the consideration of whether or not these buildings should benefit renovating or just demolishing, or just full-on
Yeah.
demolish.
And there is a formula, if you will, that if the renovation is half the cost of a rebuild, then you rebuild, right? Like, because if you're going to spend 80 million, I mean, if it's 180 to rebuild, just rebuild the building. So thank you. Good job. What? Yay. What's this team? 5? What are you guys? 2? All right. We going to do 4 then 2? All right.
Do 4 first.
Okay.
So they still getting their thoughts together.
We're saving the best for last.
Understood. Yes, ma'am.
Well, then I can't see the thingy.
All right, what'd you guys look at for?
Oh, it's going to the recording, so y'all can't hear me. Okay. So our big question was, how can we ensure that families can enjoy supporting their students' extracurricular and co-curricular activities at their local high schools? And we talked about how it's important to do that to build community and for the kids and families to be invested in the success of the school, and that when they don't have those opportunities, it might make a certain school unattractive to the kids, and so they might go to another school, and that's how it ends up crowded. We actually talked about it in the concept of middle and elementary schools as well. We talked about partnering with local communities to use their sports facilities for practices and games. We talked about partnering with local subdivision and HOAs to at least use it maybe for practice, like if a school is in the middle of a neighborhood that has some facilities like a soccer field or tennis court, to maybe partner with them at least for practice facilities, but the school would have to make sure they have liability insurance, make sure that the place is clean, because they want to be a good neighbor to the HOA. We talked about consolidating schools in certain areas and bulldoze those closed schools and use the land for sports venues, because we talked about how kids are going all across town to play at one of these 5 stadiums, and that some schools don't even have a practice field. And so some of these smaller schools, bulldoze. Don't say it like that when you talk
Sorry,
to the families.
school.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Probably won't tell them that exactly.
We don't have to bulldoze it, but it's good. Other ideas, am I missing? Oh, we talked about, so MLK High School has a football field. And so I only know that's because I exercise over there, but they play their games at one of the 5 stadiums. So why not retrofit that a bit, put some stadium seats and whatever else is needed, bathrooms back there. They have enough parking space, and so some of the games can be played there in the neighborhood as opposed to driving to Halford and Godfrey. And Chapel Hill Middle is not that far from MLK High. And so, and because middle schools play on Saturdays, then that could be an
go there.
option for the middle school, Chapel Hill, to not have to also go someplace on the other side of town. You know, when you're like right there, your neighbor's like, oh, I'm gonna come watch the game. I'm gonna come watch you. And we know that kind of encouragement is important for kids. Let's see. Oh, we talked about how middle school students at magnet schools can play sports at their home schools, but it's hard to figure out, and that online form would be very beneficial.
I will share that with the athletics who share a space with us. So in case you didn't hear that, if you go to a magnet, you play sports at your neighborhood middle and high school.
So that was the other thing too, Ms. Smith. And you
Now, I don't know if it's operational, but that's at least.
Well, no, that was the other thing in our meeting was that it's not, you don't know that unless
You seek it out?
yes.
I believe that.
So it's just something that maybe it could be on the website of, if I'm at, Wadsworth, or if I'm at a school
Yeah.
that doesn't have a program, where can my child attend?
Right.
So it's,
And it's not to say that magnets don't have any athletics, but if they don't offer something, they have the right to play at their local area or assigned school. Fair. All right, the best for last. I say now, you have to say the pressure is on now.
We had the program schools. I have to stand up too. Okay, so we had the program schools, and so the program schools are the schools such as Coral Woods and Early Learning Centers. Those are the schools that house our early elementary babies, our pre-K babies, and kindergarten babies. And so one of the things that we talked about with that is there a need of having 2 separate programs for that? And we also talked about, is the data that's collected, is there any data that's being collected to determine the effectiveness of having those centers on student achievement in the long run? We did talk about how parents do like having them in a building by themselves without the bigger kids in the buildings, but are we really getting the biggest bang for our buck by having these 2 separate centers? And so we looked at, could we serve them in one facility? And then also we looked at Margaret Harris that only serves 77 students, and is there a way that we could combine maybe one of those centers with Margaret Harris students? Another thing that we looked at was DeKalb High School Tech North. It's currently housed at Cross Keys, and Cross Keys is over capacity by 494 students, and there are 196 students that are currently at DeKalb High School of the North. And so we were suggesting maybe relocating those students so that they could free up space at Cross Keys because there are not a large number of students. If you look at our list, we have DeKalb High School Tech South that has an enrollment of 1,292. So that's a very thriving program. And so possibly moving the students from there to Warren Tech. So Warren Tech currently houses the special education CTAE students, and if we could house both of those programs in the same building, they're on the same side of town, so it would offer a space for them to go on the northern end and on the south end for students. And so that's one of the things that we looked at. The other thing that we looked at was the International Student Center. So currently 6 students outside of 7th and 8th grade, they receive intensive English instruction at their home schools, and so why could the 7th and 8th grade students that are at the International Student Center also receive that intensive language support at their home schools. And with the added support of the EL coordinators in each area, they could definitely provide the support that's needed to those schools to be able to service those students. And we wonder, what are the capacities of some of these program schools, and so could they possibly house more students at these schools, and we could make better use of the space. We even talked about Elizabeth Andrews and DECA. They're right there together. Could they share a cafeteria staff so that we could cut down on some of the funding there? And one more thing that we did say is that Eaglewood serves a very small population, and could we consider adding that to another building, adding that space to another building so that we could reduce the need for.
I hear lots of opposition.
I hear the opposition, but there was need for additional cafeteria staff, custodial staff that services that building, and I know that we're saying no, but our team and our phenomenal team wants the question to be raised.
Yeah.
Is there a building and a space that they could be housed in inside of a building so they could share facilities with another building?
Please clarify that we said it would still be separate.
It would be separate
And there-
within a building.
And there
So
are
could they-
examples.
Just like
that's
Shadow Rock,
like Shadow Rock,
elementary
where it's in a
school is
basement
upstairs,
of a-
and
yeah.
Shadow Rock, GNETS is downstairs, so they share facilities, they share a cafeteria, and so then therefore you're not using as many resources. Eaglewoods is a GNET Eaglewoods. Eaglewoods.
And there
Oh,
are
no,
some
not Inglewood.
examples of these outpost classes, like in Fulton County, they've completely done away with their
Separate.
center-based school setting. So, I mean, it definitely could be done. It's not an overnight solution.
Yeah.
We would definitely have to look at other districts who've done it and see what supports and what that could look like in a different school setting. But I think that it's worth, looking at. When you're talking about 10 students in the elementary program and 34 students in our secondary program. And there's a whole floor where some of our special ed offices are at Shadow Rock Center, and then there's a whole building over where Eaglewood is if we needed that space for other opportunities for students to learn.
Well, give yourselves a hand. You guys did wonderful. So again, this was kind of my beta on this is the process, right? There will be a lot of pointed questions, a lot of pushing questions, a lot of thought-provoking questions as we get more into it. And the questions that, if I'm being frank with you, that people have been afraid to ask out loud. And I'm not. So we're going to be asking those questions and really pushing our thought process. So again, the collective impact of this and the reimagining is real. It's not pretend, it's not for show. We are going to say things and make recommendations that is going to make people clutch their pearls. And that's fine, because I think, again, the process is we have spent 18 months looking at data, triangulating information, looking at survey information from families and groups. We took it back to those families and groups. We came back to our committee and said, this is what they said to come up with whatever that recommendation is going to be. So I think it's easier to swallow a hard pill if you have some good water, right? And so, oh, that's cute. I should put that on a shirt. I just made that up. But for instance, we changed the lottery, the school, what's that thing called? Thank you. I'm tired of it. It's almost done. Jesus. School choice lottery, and there was a lot of pushback. But there's real explanation on the why. I cannot move 3,000 kids around the district and already have set my teachers, my FTE, have gotten our budget approved, and then I'm like, hey, school, guess what? Here's 300 more kids, and they have to completely redo their master schedule. We have to move a teacher from Shadow Rock over here to, that doesn't, we went on a whole road show for several months and sent out text messages, emails. If you did not get it, I don't know what communication, but went to all the council meetings or whatever, the PTSs, A's and Y's, all those things. But operationally, it did not make sense, right? And our educators were struggling and our principals were struggling for something that we have control over, right? So change is hard, but again, if we have a process and we can explain it, I think we're more likely to bring people along the journey with us. All right, 4 minutes. All right, so what's next? A lot of information. You guys have a lot of data. The packets are in those Google Drives. If you don't have access, just ask us and Kayla will get you guys access. So just start looking at some of this stuff because again, there's a lot of stuff I think we know, and then you start looking at pieces, you're like, I didn't consider that part. And so we spend a lot of time creating these packets because I want you to have a one-stop shop with as much information as possible. And if I can't get it all in there, then there will be a link for it. But I'm trying really hard to give y'all as much in the packet as possible. They are not going to be completely comprehensive, but again, as you guys ask questions, as you fill out these exit tickets, I will find that information as much as possible to get it to you guys so we can make the most data-informed decision as possible. So again, review. And then we do not have a meeting in November because you guys are usually like the last week of the month, and next month is Thanksgiving, and I ain't gonna be here. And hopefully you won't either. So our next meeting will be the first week in December. Then I'm gonna ask you to do this wonderful exit ticket per always, and after that, good night, and thank you so much. You guys did wonderful.